Okay, so let me go ahead and share this fantastic presentation that Sarana has put together. And everybody should be able to see this right now. So I just want to make sure that that's the case. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. So Sarana, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. What I did is I decided to analyze data for Marymount and also explain the data components going from fiscal year 2010 to 2020. Fiscal year 2020 is the year that began on July 1, 2009 and ended June 30th, 2010. So that would likely be the first year that we were all affected by the recession in our budgets. And FY 2020 is the most recent year that I could get data for. So one of the things I wanted to do was explain financial budget concepts, but also use your own data to illustrate things that are going on. Could you go to slide 2, please? So there's a lot of publicly available data. The first thing I looked at was your fact book, which was not a good source of financial information. It's the most recent fact book for the current year has a pretty long lag and really only about a page worth of data. So there's much more extensive data using the iPads survey. And I put a link to the main iPads window where you can connect to a lot of other stuff. And then another survey that I like to use is the Equity and Athletics Disclosure Act data survey, which shows breakdowns of participation and spending in athletics. And here is also a link to the Gateway page for that. Could you go to slide 3, please? So I'm going to talk a little bit about these two surveys. I've got slides which give you information on how to pull the data, but I'm not going to actually do that here in the interest of time. Anybody who decides to pull down the data and has any problems doing so, please just send me an email. And Tanya's got my email address, so you can get it from her, or it's just my name, saranathornton@gmail.com. So the Equity and Athletics Disclosure Act requires colleges to provide a variety of information analyzed by gender on athletics participation and spending. And it's required in order to help the federal government enforce Title IX and to provide information to students, faculty, staff, the public, parents on the situation in athletics. But it's an incredible trove of athletics data. Can you go to slide 4, please? So this slide is basically how to access the data, and rather than take the time to walk through that, I gave you the link to the Gateway, the glossary of terms, because some of the terms might not be familiar to everybody. The fiscal years are a little bit weird in order the years for the Equity and Athletics Data Survey. So for example, 2019 is fiscal year 2020. So you sort of have to get used to coordinating that when you think about the data. And what I've given you here in numbers 1 through 6 is how to pull data, which I pulled for Marymount and which I sent to Tanya, and she can make it available to all of you, but you can also pull your own data for yourselves. Could you go to slide 5, please? So here's some data that I pulled for Marymount University, which was, I thought, of great interest. So I did fiscal year 2010, because that's the start date I chose based on macroeconomic conditions. Then date fiscal year 2020, and I picked fiscal year 2015 in the middle, just to maybe get a sense of, were there trends that appeared during the Great Recession and the immediate aftermath that went away afterwards, or have things been a sort of longer term trend? So the EADA data lists the total number of undergrads, breaks it down by male and female, but I just put the total here. The total number of student athletes unduplicated means that if a student plays two sports, for example, somebody who maybe plays um, soccer and baseball, they count as one student athlete in the unduplicated count. And then I computed, based on the data, the percent of undergrads who are playing sports. So one of the things that's interesting is Marymount has really increased the number of students who are not just playing sports, but as a percent of the student body. A lot of D3 schools have been doing this in recent years to try and boost their admissions numbers and help them with retention. But an important question for you all to ask is, what's the return on that investment? Yes, spending money, adding teams, adding sports, adding student athletes does increase enrollment, but if you have a return on investment of less than one, maybe there's something else the school should be spending money on. I also put total athletic spending. This is not adjusted for inflation. And as you can see, total athletic spending more than doubled. And then I computed athletic spending per student athlete, and that's the duplicated account. So a student plays two sports, counts twice. And to use the example before, somebody who's playing soccer, for example, will have expenses as a soccer player, and then that student would have expenses as a baseball player too. Could you go to, sorry, at the top, I just put some top line numbers. You can see the percent change in total athletic spending, over 133%. Athletic spending per student athlete, 53.4%, and almost 49% change in the number of student athletes. These increases in athletic spending dwarf the increases in spending on core missions of the university. So for example, instruction is much lower. And one other thing to note about the EADA data is it doesn't show a breakdown of how much is coming from gifts, like from alumni or parents of athletes, versus how much the university is funding out of, say, their general revenues. But it does show you what the total spending is. Slide 6, please. Oh, go ahead.
Savannah, can I ask you just a quick question to clarify? When you
Sure.
say that if the return on investment is less than one, you're talking about one student retained.
That's a good question. So if you spend $1, one additional dollar on athletics, and you only get, in terms of, student revenues from tuition and fees, for example, you only get an increase of 90 cents, then the return on investment is less than one. So if you spend $1 on something, whether it's, adding a major, adding an extracurricular program or a co-curricular program or sports, you want to see a return on investment of greater than one.
Okay, and that might be something that we can talk about a little bit later too, about best ways to approach collecting that data, finding that data.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
won't, ask any more questions about that, but just FYI.
Yep. Yeah, good question. Slide 6, please. So So going to the iPad survey, what data does iPads collect? So they collect a lot of data, more than just finance, but we're going to focus on the finance data. And any of you all who are interested in getting the other data, here's some examples of what you can find. Slide 7, please. So there's a lot of different ways to access the iPad's data. One way that you might be interested in doing in the future is comparing your institution to other institutions. But a good way to start is just to collect data on your own institution. So here's the link and the instructions on how to pull down data for your own institution. And I'm not going to go through this slide, but again, anyone who wants to do this and runs into any difficulties pulling data, just let me know, and I'd be happy to help you. Slide 8, please. So coming to the sort of budgeting elements, one of the things that Rudy Fichtenbaum and Howard Bunces, who do great finance presentations, like to say is budgets are BS. If you look at the budget as a planning document, lots of times there can be manipulations of budgets in terms of how things are categorized to show, whatever somebody wants to show. iPads uses a standard categorization, and what they use is functional spending categories, and there are 7 core categories. And so I've listed those core categories here, and I'll explain briefly what each of them are. So spending on, and this is actual spending, not planned spending, but what the university actually spent in a given fiscal year. So there's instruction, research, public service, academic support, institutional support, student services, and then other. And one thing to know is auxiliary enterprises are not part of core expenditures. And I've given you some examples of auxiliary enterprises here. Slide 9, please. So core expense for instruction. So this is the money spent through colleges, departments, and other instructional divisions that the university might have. So one of the biggest items in the instructional category is salaries and benefits for faculty and staff. And basically what you're talking about is all the people and all the costs of, equipment, facilities, in order to teach the courses that you offer. If whatever kind of education you provide, if it's all degree granting, or if some of it is not necessarily leading to a degree, like programs for returning learners. It includes expenses for administration by instructional faculty. So it includes department chairs, but not academic deans. And a university may or may not choose to include its IT expenses for academic programs in academic support, and also for the operation and maintenance of the buildings where the instruction takes place and depreciation of those buildings. Can we go to the next slide, slide 10, please? So research, not a big item at Marymount University, as you'll see, but if, for example, we were talking about the University of Virginia or VCU, this would be a large item. Includes any institutes that focus on research centers. It can include individual research that faculty members do. may also include IT expenses related to research and costs of operating and maintaining buildings where research takes place. So can we go to slide 11, please? Public service. So this is for non-instructional services that are really directed towards external constituents. So it could include a conference that the university hosts, you know, in order to provide benefits to the general public. For example, at Virginia Tech, the cooperative extension services all count as public service. If you all have a radio station on campus that is affiliated with public broadcasting in the Nova area, that would be included. And again, IT and buildings may also be, or maintenance of buildings may also be included here. These are considered, so public service, research, and instruction are the three primary functions of an institution. Can we go to slide 12, please?
And Sarana,
Yes.
this point that you make about some of these expenses maybe or maybe not are included in these categories.
Yes.
Those are I'm just, this is another thing to put out for the discussion later, but I'm interested in knowing how we would discover what that breakdown is. We have 990s
Yes.
for the institution going back, you know, many years, but I don't know to what extent I'm equipped with my degree to,
Right.
to really make sense of them. So that's just something for us to think about.
I would just email your CFO and ask them where
Okay.
they put it. So academic support includes administrative activities that support the three primary missions of instruction, research, and public service. So it includes libraries, museums. If you have academic support centers on campus, I put a demonstration school. Sometimes schools with colleges of education have a demonstration school where their student teachers work, media and audiovisual services. And always remember, when we're talking about these functional areas, we're also including the salaries and benefits of the employees who provide those services. This is where academic deans are located and the people who work in their offices. And if the university, so coming to the, you know, instruction, research, and public service that I just talked about, if your school doesn't expense the IT costs in those three categories separately, then the IT costs for those three categories are bundled and rolled into academic support.
Yeah, and one of the things that we learned in the past year and a half or so is that a lot of our IT expenses actually are put into the library, which
Yeah.
I guess is, given what this is suggesting, is not sort of far out of the line of.
No, that's not. And at some schools, they actually say that what they want to do is put all academic IT under the library, because the idea is the library is the information center. So that's not unusual. Other questions? Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Institutional support. So this is sort of the overall administration of the institution. So the, you know, president's office, the VP's offices, if you have in-house counsel or external counsel, those offices. HR is under institutional support. If you have, you know, I noticed you had a really nice poster for this meeting today. So, if you have a graphics design, printing / public relations office, that would all be institutional support. Includes the institutional support IT expenses are in this category. They're not somewhere else. But this category might also include costs associated with student services, depending on whether the school decides to put them in student services or bundle them all under institutional support. Slide 14. So student services are things that benefit the health and welfare of students that are non-instructional. So admissions, registrar, if you talk about your student health center, if it's not an auxiliary enterprise, if you have mental health counseling on campus, if you have student clubs or intramural sports will also be under student services. I checked at the iPads data, schools have the option to put intercollegiate sports either under student services or if they're sort of self-supporting, like say, for example, Alabama or Ohio State, they could be in auxiliary enterprises. Marymount's are in student services. And it may also include the cost for operation and maintenance of plant where student services take place. So slide 15, please.
There is a question in the chat.
Oh.
Would you prefer that we
Oh.
hold them, or, I mean, I've just been butting in, so.
Oh, yeah, there is no clear way to, the only clear way to break out the costs for the upper level admins is to go to the 990 forms and see who the top 5 highest paid are and collect that data. But yeah, that's the sort of clear way to do that. Good question. Auxiliary enterprises are not a core expense. A lot of schools, like for example, Hampton Sydney has a lot of athletic camps in the summer, baseball, football, soccer, lacrosse, whatever. They are, run on campus by our athletics coaches, but they're an auxiliary enterprise. They charge a fee. They're trying to make money, but they spend money to make money. So what kinds of expenses do you have for your auxiliary enterprises? Campus bookstore is also an auxiliary enterprise. So what kind of expenses do those create? And then slide 16, please. So here's the data for Marymount University. And the last column is the percent changes from 2010 to 2020. So what I did is I collected the data on core expenses per full-time equivalent student. So you can see instructional spending went up by 51.5%. But note, athletic spending per student athlete increased by a little bit more than that. Also, athletic spending per student athlete was $11,112, and spending on instruction per student is just slightly more. So there certainly might be questions about university priorities. Research spending shows a 0 in 2010 and 2015. That doesn't mean that no faculty are doing research, but it's not, it's not as part of a government grant contract or as part of a research institute or research center. Public service activities are not really significant. Academic support, you can see increased by 69.3%. So might be useful to look at the VCU study and see what's been happening in terms of increased numbers of administrators and academic support. And, is it needed? Or, you know, could it potentially be what is called bloat? Institutional support, you can see increased by about 45%. Student services only increased by 21.6%, which surprised me a little bit because athletics is included in that. But again, remember the EADA data is includes, you know, like money collected from other sources besides the university. So I think there's some interesting questions there. And then the bottom line number is, you know, what's happened to total core expenses and what's happened to total expenses per FTE student. And can we go to slide 17, please? So here the expenses are as a percent of total core expenses. So instruction accounted for 44.6% of total core expenses in fiscal year 2020. Research, very, very small amount, public service, small, academic support. What's interesting here, I think, is to look at the trends. You know, instruction has increased only a little bit, which again, I think is, it's sort of interesting to look at that trend. Academic support, I sort of wonder about that big increase in FY 2015, and then it comes back down a little bit. What's driving that? Institutional supports remain pretty constant. And again, student services are declining. One of the things Hampton-Sydney's done that I know other colleges are doing too, is they're increasingly going to parents and alumni to try and fund large amounts of athletics. So that could be playing into the student services numbers. Can we go to slide 18? So what are the core revenues categories? Tuition and fees, government grants and contracts, private gifts, grants and contracts, and return on investments. So can we go to slide 19? And tuition and fees, you'll see in just a moment, if you weren't aware already, is the big one for Marymount University. And so it covers all tuition, full-time, part-time students, all, you know, fees that a normal student would pay. And what iPads does is they take the total tuition and fee income and then divide it by the number of FTE students to come up with tuition and fees per FTE. And can we go to the next slide? Government grants and contracts. So a grant is money that the government gives to a university without an expectation of receiving a good or a service in return. And this includes state, local, and federal grants and contracts. And contracts is when you get money from the government, but they do expect something in return, oftentimes a research project or other type of program. And one other thing to know about the grants includes Pell Grants. Can we go to slide 21, please? Private gifts, grants, and contracts. So this is money from private donors, you know, again, alumni, parents, friends, for which you don't have to give them something in return. And in the legal world, that's known as, or the world of contract law, that's known as consideration. It includes revenues from private contracts. So for example, if you're hosting an academic conference for the Virginia Association of Political Scientists who study Paraguay, then they're paying for that, that would go under contracts, but it wouldn't include like an athletics camp because that would be auxiliary revenue. And also, if you're getting money from a foreign government, like some schools have Confucius centers on campus, that actually goes under private gifts and grants. And when somebody contributes to service, it includes the estimated dollar value of that service. Can we go to slide 22, please? Investment return. So this is a return on all investments that the university has. So dividends on stocks in your portfolio, interest on, securities that you own, royalties, rent, capital gains or losses that the university has. 20, slide 23, please. And then auxiliary revenues. So, again, in the case of like an athletics summer camp, maybe the university spends some money to spruce up the dorms for the students who are coming in, but then they collect a camp fee. And so what revenues are obtained for that? Slide 24, please. And then here's the data that I pulled from iPads for Marymount University. And so this is tuition and fee revenue per FTE student. So it mixes both the graduates and undergrads, part-time and full-time, but it's per FTE student. And you can see that revenues increased by almost 30% per FTE student. Government grants and contracts per FTE student, you can see that's a really small number. So the university is not getting a lot of money from government grants and contracts, which isn't surprising given that it's not a research university. Private gifts and grants per FTE student. It would be interesting to know what is happening with institutional development and fundraising. And then investment return. That's a pretty serious decline in investment returns. It would be interesting to know why that's happening. Other core revenues is another category. There is a big swing in percentage terms there, but that really is sort of small numbers. Changes in small numbers can look like big changes in percent terms. And then the total core revenues increased by almost 37%. And total revenues, which remember includes the auxiliary enterprises, increased by 47%. So it looks like the university is trying to increase its revenue stream from auxiliary enterprises, which, most schools in higher ed are trying to do now. And then slide 25, please. And then these are the revenue categories as a percent of core revenues. So tuition revenue as a percent has declined. Private gifts, grants, and contracts has increased. So again, it would be interesting to know what's going on. I would assume it's mostly not contracts, but mostly gifts and grants. So it'd be interesting to talk with the advancement people. The investment return doesn't look great in terms of, being a low number. And that's the end of what I've got. And now I can take more questions.
Yeah, so Cassie had a question that might be helpful for us all to kind of understand how this sort of impacted us. So it was a couple years ago. So we have a building in Ballston that we own outright, the land and everything, and that had been sort of generating a lot of security for us. We divided that land up into 2 parcels, rebuilt a building on one parcel, and used the land we land leased it to build, residence halls, but at the time they were apartments, right? That anyone could rent. And then a couple of years ago, we purchased that building back and are using it as residence halls now. And I think it was that downgraded our bond rating. And I'm sure that had something to do with it, but I'm not exactly sure how any of that really works. And I know that you're coming at this from sort of an outside perspective, but a lot of it, the conversation had to do with debt to debt service ratio. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that would impact the return on your investments, because that's what you pay to borrow money versus what you get paid based on your own investments. I mean, so any kind of capital gain or loss you took on the property, that would affect your investment return, but the downgrading of the university's bond rating, I wouldn't imagine that impacting the investment return. I mean, I just like the fact that it went from 1 to 0, I don't think it's remarkable, but
Right.
the fact that it's just so low to begin with, I think is remarkable.
Yeah.
I didn't have as much time as I would have liked to have gone into the endowment performance and what happened to the market value of the endowment. There's an organization called NACUBO, I should type that in the chat, but it's the National Association of College and University Business Officers. And they do an endowment survey every year. And you can look up the market value of your endowment at the end of every fiscal year and see how that has changed. Collection is that Mariemont's endowment is on the small side.
Yeah, it is. Okay, great. Let me stop sharing and ask if there are any questions or conversations that we want to sort of pick through with these experts. It might be helpful. I know that, oh, thank you, Evie. It might be helpful. I know that some of us have served on our academic budgeting body in the past, but not everybody has. And I think a lot of people new to academia or who have never sort of been in a position where they really need to sort of even think about these things may have just a hard time grappling with the timeline, right? That a budget process usually goes through. Is that something that there is kind of a general rule of thumb on?
So what it varies from based on the size of the schools. So for example, UVA and Virginia Tech, right, DCU, versus say Randolph, Macon, Hampton, Sydney, Marymount. Oftentimes, the budget cycle at tuition dependent schools is, they're starting in usually November, December to, look at budgets for the coming year.
And that's fiscal year, right?
Yeah,
That would
right.
be, so for instance, right now, November, December 21, we're looking at fiscal year 22.
22. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the one that starts June 2022.
Starts July 1.
July 1, 2022. Okay.
Right. Right. And, they'll be doing, working with assumptions in January and February, looking at the, admissions numbers, doing sensitivity analysis. What would the budget look like with an enrollment of X? What would it look like with an enrollment of Y? What would it look like with an enrollment of Z? And then, oftentimes you're not going to start to get a really firm budget these days until May.
Yeah.
And you figure out how many students have deposited, and you can start to make more solid plans for the coming year. Now, that's for tuition dependent school, right? Not for school that has substantial amounts of
Right.
money coming from other sources.
Right. And so this would impact, say, when contingent faculty get contracts, I would assume.
Yes, yeah. And not just contingent faculty, but schools that used to authorize across the board salary increases for continuing faculty. Like, for example, you would maybe get a salary letter in April, and it would say what your salary is going to be for next year, and it would include across the board increases. Schools are pushing that back, and
Yeah.
issuing letters, right, where you agree to stay on contract for another year, but they're not telling you what your salary is going to be, and that letter comes out later in the summer, like maybe June. But yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what's been happening here.
Right.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah.
See that Cassie has a question.
Yeah, thanks. I wonder if any of you state level AAU people can advise us on, if we have questions about this. I feel like just going to the administration and being like, we want to know why you're spending so much more on athletics now and if it's paying off. Like, how do we approach the administration in a way that they're going to be forthcoming and not see us as, troublemakers, to give us more answers on this?
That's a really good question. And I'll be honest with you, I don't have a great answer for that question. What I have found is, and not just the work I do in the Virginia AUP conference, but the work I used to do at the national level when I was authoring or co-authoring the AUP annual salary and benefits survey, is we found that administrations generally didn't want faculty input on spending decisions. And when faculty brought questions based on data that the faculty members were able to obtain, there would oftentimes be responses to basically send the discussion down a rabbit hole. People being told that their numbers were wrong, or that they didn't understand the numbers, or universities presenting data in ways that obfuscated. And I'll give you a quick example. We had a town hall at Hampton-Sydney on our financial status, and one of the arguments the college wanted to make was there's nowhere else that we can cut money in the budget. So what they did is they presented a slide which showed expenditures on all salary and benefits, expenditures on tuition discounts, and then everything else were little tiny categories. Instead of grouping like things together, they took things that were like, and they broke them out into very, very small categories. So it appeared that the only two big slices of the pie were salaries and benefits and tuition discounting. So I think I would say the first thing to do is try and cultivate a relationship with in the administration or people in the administration who can, talk to you and answer questions. And also emphasize that you're on the same side. You both want what's best for students. You're both interested in the long-term survival and the health of the institution. And that faculty that's educated about what's going on the financial side is going to be able to help out. Another thing that can sometimes be helpful is going to people who are one step below VPs. The controller instead of the VP for business and finance might be able to be more helpful.
I would also recommend that be in it for the long haul. If you collect data this year and show it to the administration, and the administration says, well, that's wrong, and maybe they have grounds and you can fix it, but be back next year with your next round of data. Make this a longer term project that ultimately the administration realizes that it's going to have to provide some kind of compelling answer to faculty, as opposed to do a dog and pony show and then think that they've sent that problem packing.
There's a question from Brian Flanagan. Brian, do you want to ask your question, or do you want me to? I'll go ahead and do it. He asks in the chat that it came up in a few places in the presentation, but could you tell us, Sarana, the 2 to 4 things that just surprised you, that most surprised you about our finances, or that you would be most concerned about if you were on our faculty?
I was really, I was surprised and not surprised by the athletic spending. That's something I've been studying. D3 athletic spending I've been studying for several years now, and so I'm always surprised to see schools, even though I know that this is a standard model that a lot of schools use, where they just pour so much money into athletics. And the argument, everybody repeats it as if it's urban legend, that the only reason why the students are here is because of the sports, or sports always pays for itself, or we couldn't survive without athletics. And it just surprises me in a time when schools are crying poverty and for the last 10 years that Marymount increased spending by that much. But I'll be honest with you, Hampton-Sydney did too. So, on the one hand, I know it's happening, but it just, this sort of idea that people really aren't considering what's the return on investment for every dollar you spend on whatever, whether it's athletics, whether it's dormitories, whether it's adding a new major. I just think that has to be, whether it's faculty and staff salaries, right? Recruiting and retaining good faculty. What's the return on investment? I was also a little surprised to see how tuition dependent Marymount was. I would have, I guess, if you had asked me to project, I would have probably guessed in the mid 80s, maybe the low 80s. But I did not realize that that tuition dependent. And so I think it's really important for the university, if it's going to stay financially healthy, think about what other revenue streams are there. But also to think about, how to maintain itself as an attractive place for students to come and learn.
Yeah. Sarah?
Sure. I put this in the chat too, but I was on the budget committee last year, And I am an English professor, so I don't have wide experience on, in terms of budget and economics, but the CFO said that we'll be moving to an RCM budget model starting FY 2022, I guess. And that's a budget model that, I'm not familiar with, but I was wondering if any of you had experience with schools that are using that budget model or thoughts about how that might impact us, or if this is, when I was looking it up, a lot of schools who seem to be using it are saying that it allows for more transparency in budgeting and things like that. But I was wondering if any of you had any sort of takes on that.
So responsibility-centered budgeting puts budget authority right within academic units. So, one of the, places that like I've read about it, one of the schools that, obviously, well, has been doing this for a while. Harvard has a reputation of, there's this saying at Harvard, every cattle rests on its own stand, right? So each college within the university, yeah, it's called Harvard University, but really what it is it's a conglomerate of colleges. They're almost semi-autonomous, right? So the idea is what, and maybe I don't want to be cynical, but responsibility-centered budget models can be used as a means to pressure departments that administrators say, well, your department isn't pulling its weight, right? So it's a way of sort of, it can be a way of framing, how many credit hours you're teaching, how much tuition revenue are you responsible for bringing in? And if you're not teaching that many students, that many credit hours, whatever, then you get less money and you figure out how to allocate that among your little, administrative unit. And one of the things that I do want to push back on really hard in terms of these kinds of discussions is, there is one unit of the university that generates almost all the revenues, and that's the faculty. Because if there wasn't a faculty, why would anybody come, right? I mean, I understand we need people in admissions to recruit the coming class. We need people in student health services to help our students, be successful. We need people who manage the residence halls, because, our students can't be successful unless they have, a conducive place to, spend the rest of their day. But nobody comes to college except for the education.
Mhm.
Right? There may be other factors. Maybe they want to go, at UVA, they want to go to the football games or the fraternities or whatever. But I think it's really important for us to keep emphasizing that it's the faculty who are the revenue drivers of the university, and therefore the instructional program needs to be the #1 priority.
Sarah had a kind of a follow-up question to that about the kind of information that we might be able to get about our budget, because one of the challenges that we've been having is, on the one hand, the dissolution of departments. So we don't have departments anymore, but we've always also had difficulty getting information about how revenue is sort of allocated, right? And of course, depending on which school you're teaching and what your model is, that can look very different for different people. So major driven programs, right, versus core driven programs will look very different to, from an administrative position. And that's something that we've struggled with. Sarah, would you agree? Is that something that we could use some help with? Trying to figure out how to kind of wrap our minds around that, because we don't ever have that information, right? Which is politic, right? Strategic.
So one question I have is, to what degree, well, I'm gonna maybe rephrase this. Sometimes there you can have allies in the dean of faculty's office or the provost's office in terms of getting the data you need, rather than directly going to a VP for business and finance, asking a dean to obtain the data and then share it. Maybe a possibility.
Mhm.
But the fact is, you need data. There is a lot of aggregate data that's available publicly, but the data, at sort of more micro levels that you do need, your administration is really going to be your only source of that data. To an extent, well, another thing we've been trying to work on, more recently at Hampton-Sydney, is getting AUP members onto the, for us, it's called the Budget Audit Committee. And even though they can't share all the numbers, getting the Budget Audit Committee to write a report to the whole faculty every year.
Yeah. Susan had a question. Sue, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I was wondering if you could give us some ideas as to what other universities are doing aside from tuition and research grants to increase their revenues.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, it totally varies on the type of university that you're talking about. So thinking about, colleges and universities, the sort of, under 2,000 or under 3,000 undergrads, right? Focused on undergraduate education, focused on teaching over research. A lot of them are looking at auxiliary enterprises as ways to increase revenue streams. So, how do they utilize their facilities more heavily during the summer when students may not be on campus? Is one thing that they're doing. One of the things that I think is interesting that I just learned about is some schools are contracting with Barnes and Noble, which are you guys doing this?
Mhm.
Yep.
First Day Direct or First Day Connect? Yeah, so that seems like I want to get more data on that, but that as an economist, I can't say that I think monopolies are good things.
No.
But so part of it is, yeah, you want to bring in additional revenue, but not at the expense of your own students.
Right.
So,
I was, if I could do a follow-up, I was very surprised to find out how important housing was.
yeah,
That decisions are being made for housing reasons as opposed to academic reasons, with the idea that they have to fill up that housing because it's such a loss. That what other universities are experiencing, or?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Sue, I don't know if you have any more insight on this or if anybody else does, but there's the recent, I'm on sabbatical right now, so I'm a little bit sort of removed from things, but there was the recent sort of decision to have all students actually housed in the RIXI, which is the new building, right?
Mhm.
And I believe there was some pushback from students about this because of the costs associated with it. And I'm wondering, I mean, maybe this isn't the right place to talk about that, but it reminded me because of Susan's question. That seems a little sort of draconian, I guess. Right. But at any rate.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a good question, Sue. Let me see, Jessica, you want to ask your question?
Sure, why not? I hope that you can hear me okay. I'm on double devices doing office hours in this one. But I was, out of grim curiosity, wondering if there's any financial incentive in terms of basing departments in, I guess, the traditional way on tenured and tenure track faculty, rather than the adjunctification of higher education that I keep hearing about.
So, if you look at the data, and the AUP's been collecting data on this, the, increased use of contingent faculty is a trend that goes back to the 1970s. So, and I think some of the questions are, you have to think about short-term benefits and costs and long-term benefits and costs, right? So, there are schools that use 100% adjunct and contingent faculty. There are schools that don't have tenure. Liberty University doesn't have tenure except in the law school, and the only reason why they have tenure in the law school is because the American Bar Association requires it for accreditation. But, as an economist, I mean, I can talk about from the AUP perspective, which is having tenured faculty means you have people who can fight for the things that are right, fight for the students. And one of the analogies I like to use is the rabbi who works in a kosher hot dog factory, right? We're the ones who, when the production line gets contaminated, it's the tenured faculty who can say, hey, we have to shut this line down because we don't want to sell our customers contaminated meat, because that will destroy our reputation, and that will destroy our business. But when your focus is on the short run, and I think that's a lot of the focus now in higher education administration, there's the idea that, yeah, let's have more adjuncts, let's have more contingent faculty. But, one of the things about that is, if I'm an adjunct or contingent faculty member, I don't have a lot of loyalty to the institution. I'm basically going to go where the money's best, where the job conditions are best. And the analogy that I would use from labor economics is at-will employees. There's sort of this idea of let's essentially turn all faculty into at-will employees, except instead of being, we can leave any day or any time for any reason or no reason at all, or be let go any day, any time for no reason at all. We're doing it on a semester by semester basis. So, what happens to the quality of the education when the employees don't have as long-term a relationship with the institution? Another thing that I think is important, especially at schools that emphasize teaching, is to what degree is institutional knowledge important to teach the kind of students that you have? And I don't think, at Hampton-Sydney is an extreme example of this. Walking into an all-male classroom is different than anything anywhere. And, I think if we tried to get along with contingent faculty, we would disappear because it just requires such special skills. And, I think for a religiously affiliated university, there's a similar argument that, you're not just teaching a subject, but you're teaching something more than that. So, to the degree that institutional knowledge is important, it's, I think, important to have tenured and tenure track faculty. The other thing though, is it costs, it costs more. But, you know, one of the other things I'm sort of looking at now, and I haven't done any research on this, but, you know, South Carolina, there was a bill introduced to eliminate their tenure system for publics, University of Wisconsin. And, you know, in fields where faculty members have a lot of non-academic alternatives, like, you know, sciences, economics, accounting, finance, you know, if tenure is something that makes it worthwhile for people to work for less money than they could in other job opportunities. So if schools were to say we're gonna eliminate tenured positions, they might actually end up finding that they have to pay more than I think they will.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, it looks like our time is up. I think we've had a really wonderful conversation. If anybody does have additional questions or comments, send them to me or send them to Sarana. She did put her, I think she put her email in here. I have it. So send me your questions and I can forward them on. Sarana, we do have a bunch of 990s that Micheline, who's here, and Teresia, who's also here, we're going to sort of help us look at. And I know Micheline has already taken a peek at them and has some insights, but would it be okay if we were to sort of, after we have our discussion, email you just to sort of pick your brains a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. If you could share the files with me. And also I collected a lot of data on more than I put on the PowerPoint for Marymount, and it's okay, Tanya, I'll just send you all the files.
Yeah, please do. And I did put the link to the 990s in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you.
And there it is again. I'll just copy and paste it down here, but I'll try to remember to put that in the email as well.
Thanks.
And I mean, I dug through them a little bit, but I wasn't quite sure what I was looking at, you know, so.
Yeah, yeah, they're not easy to read.
Right, right. Evie?
So I just wanted to say that this is such a timely conversation because a number of us last year engaged in a year-long activist initiative working with Mike McGee, who is at the National, and we had conducted a survey, and budget transparency was one of the issues that surfaced at the very top. So we are in process of trying to operationalize the ways in which we can engage at the state level in conversations on budget transparency. Actually, Brian is trying to operationalize it. So hold on, I think, you know, in the near future, we are going to engage you again because there seems to be remarkable activity across many institutions who are asking many of the same questions that you're asking. And thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And thanks to Brian. I know he had to leave, but thank you so much. This was really, really helpful. And yeah, everybody is very happy. So thank you so much. This was wonderful. I hope you have a really great rest of your day, and happy end of the term-ish. Sorry, Evie, but right. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Hi, Jessica.